should we jump right into talking about Jackson Hinkle on Tim Pool?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, so Jackson has been growing like crazy lately. You know, obviously he's the Marxist-Leninist is what he identifies as. A lot of people criticize him because he basically has the social positions of like a pretty standard conservative, like an American conservative, but is pro-Russia in terms of the special military operation. Has really been covering that a lot on his show and doing a lot of news and analysis based on Russia. He's debated a lot of pro-Ukraine people. And recently he went on Tim Pool's podcast, who I believe Tim's a centrist. He kind of goes back and forth. I don't know what you would call him, but from our perspective, he's basically a liberal, not a Marxist. But Jackson was able to get him to agree with a lot of stuff about communism and with a lot of stuff in terms of the war. First let's listen to him talk about Russia. And he basically, Tim Pool, since this conversation, has kind of admitted that Russia's basically got the war special military operation in the bag. The Western media has been lying every step of the way, trying to convince Americans that Ukraine is winning so that we'll keep supporting the funneling of arms and money into the corrupt Ukrainian government, puppet government. And it seems like Tim Pool has kind of changed his tune, and now he is sounding a little bit more rational, but we'll see how long that lasts. So, anything to say about this before we jump in, Carlos?
Well, just to premise it, obviously there's a few things that quite a few things we have disagreements with him on, but I've seen some of his coverage on Ukraine. It's been some of the best that you can have on YouTube, and some of his coverage on Africa has been really, really good as well. I find that people love judging others by like their standards. Hinkle is usually judged by people by like the standards of their social peers. That's not how I approach him. When I've seen his content, I just, I treat it as if I'm seeing any other geopolitical analyst that I don't know what they identify with, and I don't really care, but they are bringing forward an analysis and, or breaking certain news that mainstream Western media doesn't talk about. So that's the standard that I judge him on, and I think that's the correct one. And through that standard, there is very valuable coverage that he's done on Ukraine, Africa, and on some other things as well, especially when it comes to foreign policy and stuff.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I do think he did a good job here. I'll be transparent. Like, obviously,
I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
I've seen just a very small clip, but I haven't seen the vast majority of the videos.
Right. And obviously I have disagreements with him too on other stuff, especially some of his social views. But I think there's value in learning from how he went about this. So let's jump into it.
The fact of the matter is Russia controls 87,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. The ratio of Russian troops to Ukrainian troops lost is insane. Ukraine's lost 400,000 plus men. Russia maybe 150,000. If you listen to Putin, which no one in the Western press and Western governments, they try not to, I think he's quite clear about the fact that this 87,000 square kilometers of territory they've already taken is formally now part of the Russian Federation, and it should be respected as such. The former French president has come out last week and said that, there should be formal referendums in these regions to actually decide whether or not they want to join Russia. We've already seen these elections, though, and they weren't internationally regulated, but these people said they wanted to join the Russian Federation. And I think Russia's not going to stop and try for a peace deal again until they get Nikolaev and Odessa, which will landlock Ukraine, and also get the Kharkov region in the northeast. I think once they get that, maybe they'll try to push for peace proposals again. But until then, it's going to be the same old people, unfortunately, are going to die because no one in the West is serious about pushing for peace. Basically, what's going to happen over the next several months is the Russians are about to start an offensive of their own because they defeated the counteroffensive from Ukraine. They're going to focus on the flanks of Bakhmut. They're going to focus on maybe Kherson, and they're definitely going to focus on taking back the whole strip of land in the northeast, the Kharkiv region. They're going to probably take all of that back. And then we'll have some down period. And then next spring is when you're going to have the large blowout of the Russian soldiers pushing in the south all the way through Kherson to Odessa. They're going to completely landlock it and take all of that.
Okay. That's kind of crazy to see, because I've not been actively tracking the maps.
What has
but they kept.
What has I don't think I've ever seen anything with pool in it. So I don't know what his positions are, but how big is his channel?
Tim Pool, I don't know how big he is now, but he's got to be well over 100,000. I mean, like well over 100,000 subscribers, probably close to 1 million. If I had to guess, let me see, 1.5 million. And
my God.
Yeah, so he's telling the truth, getting the truth to 1.5 million people. And I mean, he doesn't do it by saying Putin's an imperialist, but also NATO bad. He does it by just saying the facts. And he's gotten a lot of like obviously the NAFO trolls and all these pro-Ukraine bots and stuff pile on him every single day. But, he's kind of learned how to tune them out. And just speak facts, even in places where like this, where you wouldn't expect to hear analysis like that. And yeah, I think there's value in doing that, and just telling it like it is, and not culling your message to appeal to liberals or appeal to angry people online. I don't know.
Well, so far, I think it's been all positive. I'm sure that considering what people are saying in the comment section about Tim Pool's political views, I'm sure these are not views that 1.5 million viewership, which is probably more considering other platforms, engage with on a regular basis. So the fact that he's getting this large audience and using it as an opportunity to tell the truth about the U.S.'s proxy war against Russia is extremely positive.
That's the other thing, is he's not afraid to talk to Piers Morgan or Tim Pool. Yeah. And it takes courage to do that, to do it like a debate, I guess I compare it to what I did with Vaush, because it's when someone's going to be opposed to what you're saying and they're going to try and own you and try and trip you up and make you look stupid, it can be nerve-wracking. But if you just have a good grasp on the facts and you go in and speak the truth, it resonates with people. Like the 1.5 million people who watch Tim Pool's show, they're going to hear this, and I'm sure it'll change a lot of minds. So I don't know. I guess just not being afraid to present our ideas and not being afraid to go into hostile environments, and have confidence that the truth is on your side, and then do the research necessary to where you have a good grasp of the facts. So when you do something like this, you can have a good grasp of what you're talking about. But thank you so much, Alexander, for the $5 super chat. Primo Radical has a great interview with Hinkle. Last bit is very clear. Might have to check that out. We had Jackson on the show a while back, and I went on his show to talk about Venezuela once.
Saying that Ukraine's winning, Russia's losing, they're on the verge of defeat. They kept saying that Russia's suffering massive casualties. And now, let's operate under the assumption that the reporting about massive Russian casualties was correct and Ukraine was winning. How does Russia now have total military control of the land bridge to Crimea and then some?
See, it's helping Tim connect the dots. He's like, wait, I heard the exact opposite in the media. This doesn't make sense. Like, people aren't stupid, right? People aren't as brainwashed as the media would like them to be. If you lay out the facts for people, they can connect the dots. I mean, I saw that in the interview with Vaush. There were so many people messaging me and saying that, I changed their mind about it or whatever. And that was with someone who was, trying to nitpick my arguments or make me out to seem stupid, the whole time, a professional sophist. But people aren't stupid. They can tell who's laying out the facts and who's not.
And it's not like this is, under contest. In Mariupol, Russia's already gone in. They've built new schools, new grocery stores, new hospitals. They've built free apartments for the people there. They're happy, you know, and the numbers are lies, as I'm sure, you know, we can all assume. They lie about everything in the main.
For those that don't know, check out the interview we did with Dan Kovalik, who's traveled to these areas and talks about how, you know, since the beginning of the SMOs, like these people have been able to have hope in their life again, and things have started developing, and you know, the lives that these people had, where there was just constant shelling and fear and desperation and anxiety. Those lives that they lived under for at least 8 years, but a little bit longer than that, because you know it kind of starts in 2014, but there's a longer history of those nationalist Nazi forces there since before 2014, obviously. That sort of desperation is virtually gone. A lot of these people have returned to lives in peace.
Mainstream press. I mean, Ukraine's law, it's like a generation of men, 400,000 men. Russia's got 4 times the population of Ukraine. How could anyone ever expect that Ukraine was going to win? I think if the warmongers keep doing what they're doing, you're going to have Poland that move, because they're building up Poland as an economic power. They're trying to topple Germany, France, Italy. They're restructuring the EU. Poland's going to move into Western Ukraine, Lviv, with the consent of the US and the deep state. Russia will take, again, if this happens, Russia will take everything, including Kiev. And, you know, Kiev and Rus, it used to be Russian.
Yeah.
So it could happen.
Interesting.
Very positive. A lot of truth said there to an audience of 1.5 million. And what I was going to say earlier, you were making the point of you know, being able to do this with confidence, going on Piers Morgan, Tucker's show, and all these different people. You know, think what you want to think about him or whatever. Like it's admirable that someone has the courage to go in front of those audiences of millions of people and speak largely truth. I haven't seen the other segments. I don't know what he says on the other, but everything he said there was true, and it's counter to a narrative that's being propped up by a state that has killed truth tellers for forever. So it's incredibly impressive, and you know, if my calculations are right from the last time we spoke with him on air a long time ago, he's a very young kid. So it just makes it all the more impressive. You know, I think 23-year-old, 24-year-old doing this, having that courage to get up in front of those audiences and be a truth teller in the areas where he is one. It's incredibly impressive, and it takes a whole lot of courage.
I agree. And I think he did a good job there, you know, in an environment that he knew was potentially going to be hostile, making his argument. You could say the same thing about Piers Morgan. Yeah, I want to go back to the point, like, he didn't say, you know, Putin's an imperialist and all these things that could kind of make his message more palatable to liberals. He just said what he believed to be the truth. And I think that's the best way to go about it. Even though you're going to get some slack for it from libs, I mean, that's not what we're worried about. And that's what I'm trying to say is, like, those liberals who will attack you if you don't call Putin an imperialist, or, you know, kind of steer more towards their narrative, make your narrative more palatable for them. That gatekeeps the truth from real working class people then. If you move towards liberalism to avoid getting yelled at online or whatever.
And I want to address this real quick, because this is something that people have said about us in the past, that there's money. And if you want to make money doing political commentary, you have to be very stupid to have anti-imperialist, anti-establishment political commentary. You know, how many times in the trajectory that we've had have offers presented themselves, specifically to you, Eddie, you know, to go down a different route, and it would have been tremendously more profitable to go down the route of the fake left, the left that, you know, the AOC, the left that talks like if they hate capitalism here, but they always support empire. So when he's speaking truth to power on the issues of the day when it comes to imperialism, I'm sorry, I don't think that what's driving that is a monetary incentive. And I just say that from our personal experience. Like, if we wanted to make more money as political commentators, we'd be sellouts of the ruling class. And, the fact that we hold the positions that we hold puts us at a disadvantage financially, in terms of views, in terms of a whole different load of things. It's never profitable to be a truth teller in a country that kills truth tellers and that censors them. So he has his flaws. I've seen a lot of the views that I don't agree with, but in these areas, he's right. And we shouldn't be bringing people down or saying that they're just doing it for the money. Maybe in other areas, but that's just my view. I might be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's very similar. Like the first time we got banned on TikTok was when the so-called SOS Cuba protests were going on, which was a U.S. color revolution attempt against Cuba. And I kept getting these account warnings. I kept getting my videos pulled down. And at that point, I very easily could have steered towards liberalism and, made my narrative more palatable to liberals, which I'm saying now that you shouldn't do, but I didn't. And that got me banned from a TikTok account with 400,000 subscribers that I was making, a decent amount of money from. The next time it was with Ukraine, right? I kept getting videos, the next 6 TikTok accounts that were banned. I kept getting videos having to do with Ukraine or Iran pulled down. But I kept talking about it when I didn't have to. And, for Jackson, I imagine it's something similar. He could have changed his message to steer towards liberalism and not get banned from like every paid platform on the internet except for a few. But he didn't. He continued to tell the truth about that and continue to tell the truth on these big shows. And it's gotten him banned. I mean, it's really hurt him financially in a lot of ways. So, I don't necessarily think he's a grifter. And I think a lot of what he's doing here, as Carlos said, is admirable, even if I vehemently disagree with some of his social positions and even vehemently disagree with his decision to put focus on some of those social issues. And because I think it's a distraction in many ways.
Orienting government and the economy for the public good.
Yeah, but I think that's like an oversimplification.
Well,
or
you said
idealistic.
simply, that's what it is. I think that any communist state that takes form in America is going to have communist values, or American values rather. It's going to be based on the history of our country, the Constitution. I think it would.
That's there's good and bad there. When socialism takes root in the U.S., is going to have the characteristics of our history. And if you want to use the term values, it's going to have certain values that have been central to the American trajectory, the American project, and all of its flaws and virtues. But the Constitution is a bourgeois constitution. It's the constitution of the bourgeois state, and the whole point is to sublate, overcome the bourgeois state, take whatever rational kernel it had, and leave the mystical shells behind. If you want to use that sort of image that Marx uses for his describing his relationship with Hegel, and part of what is canceled out is that constitution and a new socialist constitution is thought of. I mean, maybe it doesn't look like that, so maybe that's just me applying the theory to a reality that's still in motion, and maybe it looks different. Maybe it looks like an expansion and a rewording of different parts of the Constitution.
Right.
That's just
That's what I think. I think the Constitution needs to be sublated, but I've said a lot, in a socialist constitution probably needs to be rewritten because private property is protected in the Constitution, which, socialism and communism is moving towards the abolition of private property. But Americans are very, very attached to free speech, and that I think that's a good thing. I think that's one of the good ideals that our country set out for itself, that people should have their speech protected and the press should be protected, which is in the First Amendment. If I think socialists should embrace that and be like, yeah, we don't want to censor anybody's speech. People's speech is being censored now under capitalism. Look at what the Biden administration is doing. The only way that we can have true freedom of debate and truly live up to these ideals that were set out for our country at its founding is to move towards socialism. So, I think in some ways parts of the Constitution just need to be done away with, but in other ways, the ideals that the founding fathers set out for America that the country has never lived up to, I think those are things that can be captured and used to mobilize and organize the American working masses.
Yeah, but there we get into the distinction between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which is, it's written some years down the line. And some historians of American history argue that there was a sort of back and forth where you start with a somewhat progressive, then there's a reactionary turn, and then you get Jefferson again, and the more reactionary turn is overturned with the election of Jefferson, who was pro-French Revolution, and, who was getting called a communist, anarchist, atheist, and was in some ways the first major example of someone being red baited. And this is all in William Z. Foster's book on, I believe it's the Negro's Role in American History, which is a tremendous book on U.S. history. But anyways, onwards.
Be a Christian communist state, and I think that we can learn a lot from China and from the Soviet Union. But you look at China today, their economy is outpacing ours. It's gonna beat ours totally, probably within the next 5 to 10 years. Europe is going down, the US is going down. China lifted 845 million people out of poverty in the last 40 years. I think that we shouldn't be China, but I think we can learn things from China and the Soviet Union and other countries.
And as John Ross recently showed in his articles that I know Eddie covered, they're doing it in a way that's not only lifting the poorest of the poor out of poverty and doing that, but also just raising the living standard of everyone. Like the real wages went up for the Chinese working class by 14%. At the same time as everywhere else in the West, none of the major developed countries got even to, I think, 1% in terms of real wage increase. And some of them were negative. In terms of real wages, they fell. In terms of GDP, China outdoes them from anywhere from 5 to 460 times. It's just insane how clearly China has shown that communism, that a society ran, at least in this historical moment, by the Communist Party, aimed at social good and not profit, is incredibly superior, more efficient than any of the most developed capitalist countries. And even combining them, you won't have the level of efficiency that you get with China.
Yeah, I agree with that part. What I disagree with is he said Christian communist state. I don't agree with that, and I think that's just him again steering into the culture war stuff or what he thinks a conservative audience wants to hear. And I get it, but that there's 30% of the country that's not Christian. First of all, and second of all, when you get into, I was reading Lacerdo today, and when you get deeper into the theory, there are contradictions between Christianity and even Christian populism versus Marxism versus building a socialist state. And he just praised the Constitution and the First Amendment, which has separation of church and state. So that's the one thing I disagree with there. But other than that, yeah, what he said was fire. Everything he said.
I didn't hear the Christian part.
I know you missed it. Otherwise, I'm sure you would have said something.
But he was talking about us, not China being a Christian communist state, right?
Right. No, he's saying he thinks America should be, which I would tell him to look at what China and the Soviet Union have done in respect to religion. They've given people their cultural rights. They've given the Uyghurs their autonomous zone in that part of the country. But when it comes to the Communist Party and the theoreticians, they're definitely not encouraged to be religious, and it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Countries that have done it successfully.
Successfully?
Do you think China
didn't do it successfully? Fell apart.
Yeah, they fell apart in 69 years.
But what did they do successfully? They took their country from its knees, from dirt, from a feudal society, basically, to the economic powerhouse that defeated Nazi Germany, the bloodiest, largest battle in all of human history.
Yeah, but we're already in economic power.
This is a regardless of how many criticisms you have of Hinkle, of his Marxism, if you don't think it's real Marx, whatever the fuck. The fact that someone in the West being introduced as a Marxist or a communist is sitting there and saying, this is bullshit, socialism has succeeded, is overcoming, in doing that, the central form the purity fetish has taken in the history of Western Marxism, which has been in its ressentiment and poverty of world outlook rooted rejection of actually existing socialism. What
Right.
he's doing right there is already more progressive than 99% of the shit that the Western Marxists did. When Eric Fromm would go on, those major TV shows, because he had a few books that were bestsellers, he was condemning the shit out of the Soviet Union and actually existing socialism. He was talking about Marx on the other side and making a nice little point on various things and being very convincing, but condemning the hell out of socialism. And that's not what Jackson seems to be doing here.
Yeah, that's what every Western academic who calls himself a communist does. Yeah, I'm a communist, but every communist experiment in history has been bad, even though that's not true, and that's not what the evidence says. And this goes back to what I was saying about what I like about Jackson's rhetoric is he doesn't tail liberalism, right? He doesn't change his rhetoric to try and appeal to liberals or even, anti-communist conservatives in a lot of cases. He says straight up, this is what I think of the Soviet Union, right? And that's what we need, because for so long, Western academics have tucked and ran with their tail between their legs anytime the Soviet Union's brought up, every time China's brought up. Yes, I'm a socialist, but socialism's failed every single time that it's been tried. But trust me, I'll do it right this time. That's freaking stupid. No working class Americans are going to get on board with that. But if you tell them the truth about socialism, like we've been doing and others have been doing, people can figure it out, right? People can, these facts about the Soviet Union and China and what they did for their people are systematically deprived from the education system, from the media. So to get this message to people and to say, yes, I'm a socialist, and yes, I stand up for existing socialist countries, like that is what's needed. And that's what's needed to reach an audience of 1.5 million people, in my opinion. We need Stalinists, not Trotskyites.
Banger. Good shit.
Powerhouse. So how would
Are we,
communism benefit
or
us?
are we an economic powerhouse, or are we this Byzantine labyrinth of insurance companies, law firms that utilizes
good point.
Wall Street power, utilizing the dollar as a tool of financial pressure on the rest of the world? Without the dollar, America is not nothing, but it's nowhere near as strong as it is today. And when you see BRICS rising up, you see Russia.
By the way, 95% of the profits from the largest American companies came, according to Michael Hudson in a recent interview, from stock buybacks, rents, and interest. So purely parasitical. And within the calculus of the American GDP, all of that nonsense that doesn't produce any actual growth is calculated within the GDP.
China, India, South Africa, Brazil, you see Saudi Arabia, the UAE, you see Iran, Egypt, seven of the top 10 largest oil producing in the nations today, working to create a new global reserve currency that's going to challenge the dollar. I mean, it's not the end of America, but it's not going to be pretty for us in the future.
That's so true.
I wouldn't say that.
Country,
Okay,
and this
yeah.
is something Venezuela's focused on heavily, is they're producing real stuff. They have real industry. They have manufacturing. They have extraction industry. In the U.S., as Jackson said, it's insurance companies. It's the healthcare industry. It's tech trying to sell you on the attention economy. It's real estate capitalists. It's bankers. It's landlords. What do all these things have in common? They're not even producing anything, right?
Yeah.
They're selling you subscriptions. They're buying your attention. They're selling you healthcare. They're trapping you in debt so they can charge you interest, right? That's not being an economic powerhouse. And there's a reason that the U.S. and NATO are now running out of guns to send to Ukraine, whereas Russia and China aren't running out of guns. It's because they actually produce. Whereas we've outsourced all our manufacturing jobs to try and maximize profit for the parasitic Wall Street shareholders who dominate our economy. That's supposedly a powerhouse economy, but really is a deindustrialized, hyper-financialized, the collapsing economy of a dying empire.
And in emphasizing this, he's also destroying the myth that socialism means poverty and everyone equally poor, which is another prominent one that people very understandably dislike. No one wants to be poor and equally poor. But yeah, that's good.
You think that centrally planning an economy is a more effective strategy?
I think that every economy's planned. This economy in the U.S. is planned to enrich Wall Street, rich legacy families in our country. It's built to enrich, the largest monopoly capital powers that reside within the U.S. I think China is a country that plans the economy to lift people out of poverty in regions like Xinjiang, and also focuses on giving people tax relief, helping them create new businesses, making sure that they have enough money to afford homes and healthcare and stuff like that. I think America is a country that prioritizes every single interest of the ruling class over the interest of the working man. That's why we have 60,000 homeless veterans, 600,000 homeless individuals. We have a higher ratio of homeless in our country compared to any industrialized developed nation on the face of the earth.
What about property rights? Would you suggest doing away with?
What about
Pretty
property
good.
rights? I don't give a shit. That is a good point, though. Like under the era of neoliberalism, every economy is planned. Our economy is
Everything.
just planned to bail out Wall Street and help Wall Street. And I think it's funny that, like, what about property rights? Like, we can't move towards a more rational system because of property rights. Like, we're gonna let people be homeless, we're gonna let people starve, and we're gonna let people die and continue fighting endless wars because of property rights. We can't infringe on the sacred, holy property rights. Like, who gives a shit? I care about humanity. I don't care about property rights.
Mm. And this is, I know there's people commenting, emphasizing the bad stuff, but he is talking again to an audience of 1.5 million people, at least. It could be more. 1.5 million American people who have been generationally fed the dog shit anti-communism of McCarthyism, who are now in worse conditions than their parents and grandparents have ever been, are looking for alternatives to the status quo, might have a little bit of lingering anti-communism, but are open to listening to something that proclaims itself to be communist. And insofar as he's doing that, he's destroying those barriers, which in millions of people, which make it harder to bring them to communism. He's making communism seem more rational to people who have been painted communism as the most irrational and idiotic thing in the world that only leads to genocide and poverty and all of these things. So, like him or not, critique his bad parts, whatever. Objectively, what he's doing here is incredibly positive, which is opening up people in a way not unsimilar to how Bernie did in 2016 to the idea that something like socialism or something like communism might be actually very attractive and what the country might need.
Them.
I think we should just give property to the people. Trump's talking about this new plan for America cities. He's talking about 10 new cities across the United States. We'd have, top elite architecture specialists throughout the country that submit plans to build new cities where young Americans with families are basically going to get the opportunity to buy land, buy homes for pennies on the dollar for super cheap. And I think we should do that right now. I mean, why is it that every American is governed by debt? Every American is in debt when it comes to their home loans. Every American's in debt when it comes to student loans. Even medical debt is insane right now in the United States. Why is it? This is the last thing I'll say. Everything about communism is about taking power away from the wealthy hordes, the Sacklers, the Rockefellers, the Bushes, all these families that are hoarding our wealth, our resources in America right now and keeping it for themselves for who knows what. Why is it that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos are allowed to buy up all the land in this country? And no one questions that. But the idea of giving every American enough land to get by, maybe have a small garden or a farm or something like that, that's insane, and no one's allowed to talk about that. And that's some communist conspiracy that no one's ever going to imagine ever taking shape here.
Well, compromise. All of the land seized by the Bureau of Land Management, we break it apart and we give pieces of it to various American citizens.
I was going to say, this doesn't really sound like communism. It almost sounds like just a form of socialism that you're describing, that you want the government to do more for the American people. Because communism would be the government owns all the land. We're not getting it.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's not.
Gosh, it's hard to listen to these guys.
But what I think you can say,
they're a weird kind of like post-communist, like authoritative.
Yeah,
state.
it's like land leases, right?
Yeah. Well, China is 100% ML line. I mean, you look at Mao, you look at Deng Xiaoping, you look at Xi Jinping. I mean, you read his books, Governance of China. It's all an ML line. It's 100% Marxist-Leninist. And there's a lot of people who try to say, well, China's like semi-capitalist. It's a capitalist communist state.
Well,
Right.
yeah,
And they say he's not talking about communism. He's talking about socialism. Well, and he says China's following an ML line. What I wish he would say too is China, that means they're in a stage of socialism transitioning to communism, right? So it's not a landless, or it's not a classless, stateless society yet, but that's because it's a transitionary stage. It's socialism. where you begin land redistribution and you begin these central planning programs to increase the productive forces and start redistributing the means of production to the workers. So, his response about property rights was good. Like, no, we want to give the land to the people. I mean, land reform, land redistribution is the basis of any socialist project. But, and then they respond, well, that sounds like socialism, not communism. Well, that it's the first steps of socialism, which is a transitionary stage that leads us to a communist society, which is the ultimate goal. So I feel like if Jackson had just a tad, better grasp on theory, he would have been able to like hit a grand slam here. But I mean, he still did great there, and points out that China is following a Marxist-Leninist line. Like, this is 21st century socialism. Yeah, it doesn't sound like the idea of communism and socialism, the childish ideas of communism and socialism that Tim Pool and his co-hosts have been indoctrinated with. Where communism is the government owns everything, and the state versus socialism is the government only owns a few things. But yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said. We got to get him in our Marxism school classes, so that when he reappears, he can have that analysis a little bit more sharper. But no, incredibly positive, dispelling a whole lot of myths about communism to millions of people. And, I'm not out here searching for purity. I'm searching for our people moving the class struggle forward, helping some folks elevate their consciousness, dispel myths that benefit the dominant capitalist imperialist order. And Jackson, in those interviews, those clips that we just saw, is doing that. So that's a round of applause.